Welcome to Life Stories, where sometimes the truth doesn't come from the living, but from the dead. Imagine standing at your husband's funeral, heart shattered, holding your son's hand, and then the woman he cheated with stands up in front of everyone and says, "He never loved her. He loved me." What would you do? Scream, collapse, or stay silent because you already knew something she didn't? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about the kind of strength that doesn't roar, but whispers. It's about the lies we believe, the truths we bury, and the one final message that changes everything. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you breathless. And now, let's begin. The church smelled of lilies and secrets. Nora hadn't expected the sanctuary to be this full. Rows upon rows of familiar faces, co-workers, neighbors, distant relatives, all dressed in muted shades of black and gray, their expressions somewhere between solemnity and curiosity. She wondered how many were there for Ethan, and how many were there for the show. The casket gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead lights. Closed, untouched, a perfect symbol of the man she had married. Polished, presentable, but ultimately unknowable. Her mother sat beside her, fingers fidgeting with a string of pearls as if prayer could steady grief. On Nora's other side, Aidan clutched a small wooden cross, his eyes darting around the room with the quiet alertness of a child trying to decode adult pain. He hadn't cried. Not since the accident. Not once. He had only asked her, in the smallest voice she'd ever heard, "Did Daddy love me?" Nora hadn't known how to answer. The air was thick, not just with sadness, but with something more pungent, unanswered questions. Ethan had died 6 days earlier on a slick highway somewhere outside Monterey, returning from a business trip that hadn't shown up on any of his calendar invites. The coroner said it was instantaneous. The silence that followed wasn't. It hung like fog, dense and everywhere. Nora had spent the morning in quiet rituals, hair pulled back, eyes concealed with concealer rather than courage, lips painted the exact shade she wore on her wedding day. A cruel echo. The same shade Ethan once said made her look like someone who knew her worth. She didn't feel like that woman anymore. The organ played its sorrowful hum. People whispered her name. Some offered looks of pity. Others barely met her gaze. And then the air shifted. She felt it before she saw it. Sienna Hart entered the church like a flame through fog. Red dress, gold heels, hair that curled deliberately, like she'd walked out of a magazine shoot rather than into a funeral. She paused at the back, under the archway, assessing the room with the calm arrogance of someone used to being watched. Nora's breath caught. Her mother stiffened beside her but said nothing. She didn't have to. Sienna took her time walking down the aisle. Every step echoed like a drumbeat. People turned. Whispers grew louder. Aidan glanced up at his mother. "Is that someone Daddy knew?" "Yes," Nora said simply. "Someone who thought she was important to him." When Sienna sat down, third row, center aisle, like she was saving a seat for destiny, Nora didn't flinch. She had expected her. She had counted on her. Ethan had always loved spectacle. Even in death, it seemed, he wanted to orchestrate one last act. As the pastor began his eulogy, Nora stared at Ethan's photo on the altar. It was from a trip to Carmel. Aidan had just been born. Ethan's smile in the photo looked real. Too real. Nora wondered if she'd captured a rare truth or just another well-practiced mask. But truth, she was learning, rarely lived in photographs. The pastor's voice was halfway through a verse about love enduring all things when Sienna rose. It wasn't dramatic. It was intentional, calculated. Her red dress shimmered against the pews like a challenge. "I know many of you don't know me," she began, voice clear, confident, like a woman delivering a TED Talk, not a funeral disruption. "But I knew Ethan better than most of you ever did." The room stilled. "I was part of his life, for 5 years. Not in secret. He told me everything. How trapped he felt, how he couldn't breathe at home. He stayed for Aidan, not because he loved her." Her eyes met Nora's then. Steady, smug gasps. A few murmured prayers. One person dropped a program. The pastor froze, his Bible still open mid-verse. Nora didn't move. She had promised herself she wouldn't. This wasn't her fight. It never had been. But Sienna didn't know that the fight was already over. And just as the room teetered between chaos and sympathy, a figure stood from the far aisle, Malcolm Tate, the family lawyer. He walked calmly, almost serenely, toward the front of the church. In his hands was a small, wooden box, polished, nondescript, the kind you might mistake for a jewelry chest or a keepsake. The air inside the sanctuary tightened. "Sienna Hart," Malcolm said evenly. "Ethan left specific instructions that this be delivered to you today. In front of everyone." Whispers turned into a hush. Sienna faltered for the first time. But she stepped forward, took the box with trembling hands and the face of someone who believed she was about to be crowned. She opened it, and the world shifted. No one could see what was inside. Only her. But her reaction was instant. She dropped the box, let out a guttural, broken scream that cracked against the stained glass windows. Her hands flew to her mouth. She stumbled backward as if the contents had struck her. Her expression twisted, grief, shock, betrayal, and something darker. She looked at Nora with eyes full of fury and confusion. Nora didn't blink, didn't move. Sienna's voice cracked. "Why? Why would he do this to me?" Nora stood slowly, positioned Aiden behind her. Then, soft but steady, she said, "Because he did it to me first." Sienna didn't answer. She turned, walked, ran. The church door slammed shut behind her with a finality that sounded almost holy. And the box? It remained on the floor, open, silent, damning. What would you have done if the truth came too late to be shared in anger? Have you ever realized too late that silence can be its own kind of justice? The next chapter reveals what was inside the box and why it destroyed her more than any lie ever could. The sound of the church doors slamming behind Sienna lingered longer than expected, like thunder that refuses to leave the sky. Nora remained standing for a moment, one hand still resting protectively on Aiden's shoulder, her eyes on the wooden box that lay face up like a dropped confession. The hush in the room wasn't reverence anymore. It was tension. People didn't know whether to look at her, at the box, or at each other. The pastor cleared his throat, awkwardly, glancing between Nora and Malcolm Tate. "I believe we'll now continue with the hymn," he murmured, but no one moved. They weren't ready for music. Not yet. Not after that. Nora leaned down and whispered something to Aiden. He nodded and stepped aside, allowing her to approach the box alone. The floor beneath her heels felt softer than it should have, like the world was giving way. She didn't look at the contents. She didn't have to. She had already read the note, already seen the photograph. But the weight of it felt different now, exposed in public, no longer a private reckoning. She crouched and gently closed the lid, then lifted the box and walked back to her seat without a word. The silence cracked with the sound of her every step. Later, after the service staggered toward its awkward end, and mourners began filing out with casserole dishes and guilty glances, Nora stood in the corner of the vestibule, the box cradled in her arms. She greeted no one. She offered no tears. A neighbor approached to give her a hug, but she stepped back, polite but firm. "I think I need a moment," she said, and they left her alone. In the car ride home, Aiden was quiet again. His fingers traced the grain of the wooden cross in his lap. "Mom?" he asked softly, eyes still fixed on the dashboard. "What was in the box?" She thought about lying, about saying it was something for grown-ups, something boring, a legal thing. But then she remembered what she had promised herself in the middle of that funeral. No more protecting people from the truth. "It was a letter," she said, "and a picture." "Of her and Dad?" "Yes." "Was it bad?" Nora swallowed. "It was sad," she said, "because sometimes people aren't who you thought they were, and sometimes they only show you the truth when it's too late." Aiden didn't ask anything else. He just nodded and leaned his head against the window. That night, Nora stood in the kitchen, staring at the box on the counter. She hadn't opened it again, but it felt alive in the room, like an unwanted guest. She poured herself a glass of wine, then didn't drink it. Her reflection in the window was unfamiliar. Her lipstick had faded, but the pain was sharper than ever. Malcolm Tate called around 10:30. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, "and to say, I've never seen anyone hold themselves with more strength than you did today." Nora closed her eyes. Strength is just silence people admire when they don't know how loud your pain really is. There was a pause. You should know, Malcolm continued, that the will had more than just the box for her. There's a secondary clause, something Ethan added last minute, but he didn't want it read aloud unless you agreed. What is it? A recording. Nora's body went still. He left you a message. Just you. She didn't speak. The wine glass trembled slightly in her hand. I can bring it by tomorrow, he said. No, she whispered. Not yet. After the call, she walked back into Ethan's old office. The room hadn't changed much since his death. Papers still stacked, the smell of cedar and ink lingering. She sat in his chair. For a long time she didn't move, and then with a deep breath she opened the drawer that had once held the receipts. They were still there. Crumpled hotel invoices, credit card charges, a necklace that had never been hers. For years, she had tried to ignore them, convince herself she was paranoid, insecure, too emotional. But now, seeing them laid bare beside the box on her kitchen counter, she realized the full scope of his betrayal wasn't just in the cheating. It was in how easily he had let her question her own reality. Nora reached into the drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was the engagement ring he had given her 18 years ago. It was simple, modest. She had loved it. She turned it over in her palm, then slid it onto the counter beside the wooden box. 2 lies, side by side. Then she opened her phone. She scrolled through her messages until she found the last voicemail Ethan had ever left her, 2 days before the crash. Hey, I'll be home late. Don't wait up. That was it. No I love you, no mention of Aiden, just an empty phrase, like a placeholder in a life he no longer planned to come back to. Nora hit delete. The phone made a soft sound, and then silence. When someone you love dies with the truth still clenched in their fists, what do you do with the pieces they leave behind? In the next part, Nora listens to the recording, a voice from the grave that could either offer peace or tear open everything she's barely begun to hold together. The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual. Not the heavy silence that had filled it since Ethan's death, but something else. Something cleaner, like the aftermath of a storm that had finally passed. Aiden was in the backyard, kicking a soccer ball against the fence, with soft thuds that made Nora feel, for the first time in weeks, like the world hadn't stopped entirely. The sun filtered through the blinds in streaks of soft gold, catching dust in midair. Everything looked the same, but everything was different. She stood in the kitchen, the small wooden box still on the counter, and next to it, the flash drive Malcolm Tate had dropped off that morning. No envelope, no note, just the drive, plain and black and silent, holding Ethan's final voice. For an hour, she'd walk past it, pretending she didn't notice, but her hands kept brushing the edge of the counter, and her chest kept tightening with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She had no idea what he'd recorded. An apology? A justification? Another manipulation wrapped in guilt? She sat down at the kitchen table and plugged the drive into her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. Then she clicked play. There was a crackle of static, a cough. Then his voice. Nora, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone. And it means Malcolm kept his word, so thanks, Malcolm. A pause. A long one. I don't know where to start, or if you even want to hear anything from me, but I need to say it, even if it's only to an empty room. I hurt you. I know that. I knew it when I did it. That's the worst part. Not that I made a mistake, but that I made a choice. Repeatedly. Nora blinked, her breath slowing. I kept telling myself I had reasons, that I was unhappy, that I felt invisible, that you and I had become business partners raising a child, not a couple. But none of that was a reason to betray you. It was just a reason to excuse myself. The truth? I think I liked being wanted. Sienna gave me that. The admiration, the attention, the illusion that I was someone better than I really was. But it wasn't love. Not real love. I don't even think I knew what real love was until I saw how you looked at me after you found out. Not with anger, not even with hate. Just silence. That's when I realized I'd broken something I couldn't put back. His voice cracked then slightly, and for a second, she heard the man he used to be, or the one she thought he was. I didn't write you a letter because I didn't think words could fix what I did. And maybe I was a coward hiding behind this recording. But I didn't want to die with nothing said. So here it is. I'm sorry. Another pause. I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to live, Nora. Really live. Not just survive like you did with me. Don't let the worst thing I did be the last word in your story. Please. For Aiden, for yourself. The recording clicked off. Just like that. Nora sat still for a long time. She didn't cry, she didn't smile, she just breathed. Then she reached for the box, the one Sienna had opened like a prize and dropped like a curse. She opened it again. Inside was the photo of Ethan and Sienna on some beach she didn't recognize, arms around each other, laughing. On the back, Ethan had scribbled the words that had undone everything. For the years I stole from both of you, I never loved you. I only needed to feel wanted when I didn't deserve to be. Nora stared at the words, then at the photograph, and then she reached for the lighter. She stepped outside into the backyard. Aiden looked up. "Can I help?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Together they stood over the fire pit. Nora held the photo above the flame. It caught quickly, curling at the corners, blackening Ethan's smile first. They watched it burn until there was nothing left. "Was that the lady from the funeral?" Aiden asked. "It was," she said. "She hurt you, right?" "No," Nora replied. "She just reminded me of how much I'd already survived." Aiden seemed to think about that for a moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that kids give you when they feel safe. Later that week, Nora took down the wedding photo in the hallway. Not in bitterness, just clarity. She replaced it with a photo of her and Aiden on the Ferris wheel at the county fair last summer. Both of them windblown and laughing, no masks, no lies. She donated Ethan's suits. She canceled the joint account. She removed his name from the mailbox. Not out of vengeance, out of peace. Nora didn't become someone new. She just finally became herself. And on a rainy Tuesday morning, she sat on the porch with her coffee, listening to Aiden hum to himself in the living room. The house was no longer haunted. It breathed again. And so did she. Because in the end, it wasn't Ethan's voice that freed her. It was her own silence, finally broken. What did this story make you feel about love, betrayal, and finding your way back to yourself? Comment 100 if this story moved you. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for watching Life Stories.